welcome to That Dang Dad. My name is Phil, and tonight, as promised, I want to talk about police and prison abolition from the perspective of a former police officer. Spoiler alert, I think abolition is a pretty important project that we should be working on. Let me tell you why. I want to start with a couple caveats. First and foremost, I'm not an expert in abolition. I'm a student, and I'm coming to you tonight as a student to kind of share what I've been learning. Secondly, I'm an extremely privileged white guy, and I've done lots of arresting, and I've never been arrested, even when I probably should have been. My perspective on this is extremely limited, and you should be listening to other perspectives much more diverse than mine. Third, I'm going to use police and prison abolition pretty interchangeably, except for specific examples. I do believe that the way we do law enforcement is inextricably tied to the way that we do the prison system and the judicial system. Lastly, I live in America, and so a lot of my perspective is going to be on how America does things. I don't mean to ignore the global side of the struggle, but I'm trying to keep this video concise. Just know that the abolition movement spans many decades, many philosophies, many communities, many thinkers, and not all of them always agree with each other. I just want to kind of introduce you to these ideas and hopefully show you why abolitionism isn't as extreme as it might sound. Alright, so let's get into it. What are the basic beliefs of police and prison abolitionists? Keeping in mind my prior caveats, here's what Professor Dorothy Roberts says are the 3 tenets of abolition in a foreword to the November 2019 Harvard Law Review. She says, first, today's carceral punishment system can be traced back to slavery and the racial capitalist regime it relied on and sustained. Second, the expanding criminal punishment system functions to oppress black people and other politically marginalized groups in order to maintain a racial capitalist regime. Third, we can imagine and build a more humane and democratic society that no longer relies on caging people to meet human needs and solve social problems. For me, that third point is like the heart of this whole thing, and if you remember nothing else from this video, I want you to remember that one. In fact, go ahead and write it down. You and I can imagine a better world where people in crisis aren't locked in a dark hole and denied dignity, treatment, and human compassion. For another angle, here's Angela Y. Davis in her book, Are Prisons Obsolete? She says, the prison functions ideologically as an abstract site into which undesirables are deposited, relieving us of the responsibility of thinking about the real issues afflicting those communities from which prisoners are drawn in such disproportionate numbers. An attempt to create a new conceptual terrain for imagining alternatives to imprisonment involves the ideological work of questioning why criminals have been constituted as a class, and indeed, a class of human beings undeserving of the civil and human rights accorded to others. And lest you think that abolitionists believe that everyone should just get away with crimes and no one will ever see justice, Davis goes on to state, there's a growing body of literature on reshaping systems of justice around strategies of reparation rather than retribution, as well as a growing body of experiential evidence of the advantages of these approaches to justice and of the democratic possibilities they promise. Lastly, I want to include this quote from critical resistance activist Mohammed Sheikh about police abolition. Watch how snugly it fits in with what we've already discussed. From its origins being closely linked to patrols capturing black people escaping slavery, to the crushing of labor struggles, the role of modern policing has been to uphold and enforce social control, white supremacy, and the interests of those in power. And whenever communities organize to resist their oppression and demand power, policing, as well as imprisonment and surveillance, are used to repress movements and efforts for self-determination. On a more practical level, why are the police the first responders or even responders at all to people having mental health crises, getting into an accident, or to people committing the unthinkable crime of being homeless? The state and those invested in social control have prioritized policing at the expense of funding and political will for resources that might actually respond to and address situations productively. At the risk of oversimplifying the topic, I think that these quotes provide a nice foyer, a nice lobby for getting in on the ground floor of what abolitionism is all about. Abolitionists are asking you why it's normal to just write off millions of people from marginalized and oppressed communities as bad guys. They're asking you to consider whether there are things that we can be doing for those communities that would prevent harms from happening in the first place. And for the people that do harm their community, abolitionists want you to imagine ways to help the offender see the harm they caused, learn from the experience, learn strategies to help them not harm people again, and to help them repair the damage that they caused. Deep down, we all know that retributive justice does not drive rehabilitation, does not drive reintegration, mental health, or community repair. It's a hole that we shove people into when we don't want to think about them. As I see it, abolitionists are asking you to stop throwing people away and to start helping them thrive instead. Anytime abolition is discussed, a very intelligent, very handsome man named Sir Chadwin Labraine will enter into the room, they'll lower their sunglasses, and they'll say,
"But what about the murderers?"
Unfortunately, since 1974, no abolitionist scholars or activists have ever thought of this. This man has been a thorn in our side for decades, and until he stopped, I'm afraid this movement is dead in its tracks.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
In all seriousness, it's not a stupid question. Let's hear from Angela Davis again. She says, the first step would be to let go of the desire to discover one single alternative system of punishment that would occupy the same footprint as the prison system. An abolitionist approach that seeks to answer questions such as these would require us to imagine a constellation of alternative strategies and institutions with the ultimate aim of removing the prison from the social and ideological landscapes of our society. In other words, we would not be looking for prison-like substitutes for the prison, such as house arrest safeguarded by electronic surveillance bracelets. Rather, positing decarceration as our overarching strategy, we would try to envision a continuum of alternatives to imprisonment: the demilitarization of schools, revitalization of education at all levels, a health system that provides free physical and mental care to all, and a justice system based on reparation and reconciliation rather than retribution and vengeance. What this means is that abolitionists are not typically saying, all right, on Tuesday, we're going to open up all the prisons, we're going to turn everybody loose, and we're just going to let nature take its course. Here's a quote from the Critical Resistance Abolitionist Toolkit FAQ. As a set of political beliefs, prison industrial complex abolition is based in a feeling of what is possible. So instead of thinking about what we want to destroy, it may be more helpful to think about what we must build to abolish the prison industrial complex. We need to be able to create an environment for ourselves that provides the basic necessities we need to live, such as safe and steady housing, sufficient food, access to medical care. This train of thought is also part of police abolition specifically. When we talk about defunding the police, we're not saying to take that budget money away and just blow it on a new stadium. We're saying to take that money and more money and reinvest it in the community in ways that address the root of crime. I don't think it's controversial to say that people who have all their needs met are much less likely to kill, to steal, and to harm their community. Look, I was a cop for 8 years. In that time, I arrested murderers, I arrested rapists, child molesters, drug dealers. Those cases made up like 5% of my career. The rest of it was spent on traffic accidents and family arguments and loud parties and medical and mental health crises, property damage reports, drunk people being annoying, just generally patrolling around and getting in people's business. My community was not made safer, and you were not made safer because me and my gun showed up to insert ourselves into a domestic argument or to deal with someone who's off their meds. Did you know that half of all people killed by police have a disability? Does that make you feel good about the system? Did you know that a recent analysis of zip codes in which police killings occurred showed that the poverty rate in the killing zone was over double that of the zip codes in which no police killings occurred? Doesn't it seem like poverty is strongly correlated to your likelihood of being killed by a cop? Do you feel good about a system in which disability and poverty and non-whiteness are what gets people beaten, arrested, and thrown into a dark hole? My community and yours would have been a lot better off sending trained healthcare professionals to a lot of the calls for service that I received. Or maybe like trained conflict resolution counselors or social workers who had the resources to unite people with financial aid. Or hell, just someone showing up with a couple of bags of groceries to take the pressure off. Now, might there need to be some kind of critical response team for rare incidents where the only solution is some kind of use of force? Maybe. But the point is that today, police are hammers. Everything on duty looks like nails. And that leads to a lot of people getting screwed. So maybe an answer to Sir Chadwick's question goes something like this. As an abolitionist, I'm really interested in why a person kills, why their environment incentivizes that behavior, what needs of theirs we can meet to prevent them from killing again, and what they can do to help the survivors process and recover from that harm in some small way. Being forgotten in a hellhole doesn't help this person address their impulses, nor does it provide meaningful reparations for the victims, nor does it address the systemic and environmental factors that will lead to other people killing. No one is served by this arrangement, except for the corporations profiting off prisons because of cheap labor and expensive services. Suck it, Chadwin. Now, maybe you're like me, where when you first heard the concept of prison abolition, it seemed really new, like it came out of nowhere. Angela Davis traces the roots of the modern movement back to at least 1974 in a book by Thomas Matheison called The Politics of Abolition. It was written in the wake of several prison uprisings at the time. If 1974 still sounds recent, I think it's important to remember that our modern concept of a criminal justice system is itself a fairly recent invention. In his book Discipline and Punish, Michel Foucault, in his book Discipline and Punish, Michel Foucault studies the evolution of criminal punishment during and after the 1700s, and he says the following. In France, a tighter, more meticulous implementation of the law tended to take account of a mass of minor offenses that it once allowed to escape more easily. In the 18th century, the law became slower, heavier, and harder on theft, whose relative frequency had increased, and towards which it now assumed the bourgeois appearances of a class justice. The growth in France above all, and especially in Paris, of a police apparatus that prevented the development of organized, open criminality, shifted it towards more discreet forms. To this set of precautions, one should add the very widespread belief in a constant and dangerous rise in crime. In fact, the shift from a criminality of blood to a criminality of fraud forms part of a whole complex mechanism, embracing the development of production, the increase of wealth, a higher value placed on property relations, stricter methods of surveillance, a tighter partitioning of the population, and more efficient techniques of locating and obtaining information. It's also important to acknowledge that modern policing has its roots in the runaway slave patrols of the American slavery era. Groups of rowdy white boys who hunted escaped slaves and weren't known for their accuracy. For example, Jonathan Daniel Wells writes about Captain Isaiah Rinders, who was part of an early version of the NYPD. Rinders and his cronies made a fortune kidnapping runaway slaves, as well as any random black person that could be plausibly sold back to a plantation, regardless of whether they were actually a runaway slave or not. Though the Civil War caused runaway slave patrols to wane briefly, they came roaring back in the Reconstruction era, and they were often affiliated with local law enforcement, like our friend Rinders and the nascent NYPD. Thus, the modern police and prison abolition movement has deep roots in the slavery abolition movement. I don't usually appeal to being on the right side of history, but I don't think it's inappropriate to point out that people were saying the same thing about slavery abolitionists that they're saying about prison abolitionists today. Okay, so maybe the concept of police and prison abolition still sounds a little too extreme to you. I totally get it. It's a spice of meatball when you first encounter it. So may I interest you in a couple appetizers instead? Here's a good one. Cash bail. It sucks. Did you know that over 500,000 people are sitting in jail right now despite not being convicted of a crime? Legally, they're innocent until proven guilty, and yet we have them rotting away in that dang hole again. This is because for many jurisdictions, you have to pay a certain amount of money to get out of jail as collateral to ensure that you show up for your court dates. Now, haven't we been talking about how poverty is a huge driver of crime and police response? If that's true, then wouldn't cash bail screw over exactly the kind of people who get arrested? Not only does cash bail further criminalize poverty, but people who can't pay their bail get stuck in jail for months, which can cause them to lose their jobs, lose their housing, which only further shoves them into a cycle of poverty. The city that I patrolled in was predominantly Hispanic and low income. Many families had both parents working 2, maybe 3 jobs. And those jobs were mostly shift work, gig work, day labor work. You think those jobs are just waiting around for them to get out of jail? You should know that jurisdictions like Washington, D.C. and New Jersey have both pioneered pretrial detention reforms, essentially eliminating cash bail and offering services to help people get to court, like mailed reminders and travel vouchers. Amazingly, helping people instead of hurting them had really great results. The vast majority of people released pre-trial showed up for their court dates. This one's a no-brainer. Support the end of cash bail. Or how about this one? What if we didn't send cops to certain kinds of calls and sent trained professionals instead? That's what Eugene, Oregon has been doing with their Cahoots program. Instead of sending cops on calls related to mental health, addiction, minor disagreements, a mental health professional and an EMT respond instead. 2019, Cahoots responded to 24,000 calls for service, and they only needed police backup 150 times. In the Cahoots model, it's not full police abolition because the Eugene PD still exists. But to go back to our original tenets of abolitionism, it helps us imagine and build a more humane and democratic society that no longer relies on caging people to meet human needs and solve social problems. What services could we offer our communities if we reduced bloated police budgets, redirected those funds towards meeting basic needs and making people feel like they belong in their community? Here's another good one. How about automatically expunging criminal records after an appropriate amount of time, like they're doing in Michigan right now? Maybe even taking it further. If poverty is a huge predictor of crime, why not make it easier for people released from prison to find gainful employment? If you truly wanted less crime, keeping people paid and working within their community is a great way to reduce the chances of recidivism. Hey, why aren't released felons allowed to vote? They're citizens. They have a vested interest in the direction of their community. Why don't they get a say? How can you ask someone to reintegrate into a community and then tell them that their opinions on that community don't count? Seems like a bad plan. Psst. Why aren't incarcerated people allowed to vote? They live here too. Are they a part of this country or aren't they? How can you ask them to play by society's rules and then deny them a voice? Well, this is my longest video to date, so let's bring it home. You watching this right now, do you want to sleep soundly in your bed at night, confident that no one will break in or steal your car? Do you want to walk through a parking lot at night and not worry that some scoundrel is going to attack you in the shadow of some huge SUV? Do you want to send your kids to school and feel confident about their safety when they're out and about in the world? Of course you do. Me too. You and I want to feel safe, secure, cared for, and confident. So as a former police officer who worked a very rough beat for 8 years, I need you to hear me out. Our current system is not working. It is not making you or your family safer. The United States has the largest prison population in the world, 2.3 million people. Nobody loves shoving people in cages more than us. Are these people learning coping strategies? Are they making meaningful reparations to their communities for the harm that they've caused? Are their physical, mental, and emotional needs being met to help them reintegrate into their communities? Are you excited to live near and work with formerly incarcerated people because you believe that they've been rehabilitated by their time in prison? This system is not making any of us any safer, and you know it. It's just hiding people away so that we don't have to see them anymore. When I was a cop, we used to call prison criminal college. I'll let you guess why we called it that. Retributive justice does not secure your wallet, your car, or your kids. It just gives you the tiniest squirt of dopamine after those things have been taken from you. You don't have to go whole hog into abolitionism today. It's a big paradigm shift, and you're not a bad person for having questions and concerns and hesitations. That's valid. All I want you to do today, just for a little bit, is imagine a more humane and democratic society that no longer relies on caging people to meet human needs and solve social problems. Anyway, thank you for joining me. I don't normally talk this long in my videos, so thank you for indulging me. If any of you feel comfortable sharing your bad experiences with cops in prisons and how they weren't helpful to you when you needed help, please tell us in the comments. Check out the references in the video description to learn more. Please like and subscribe, and definitely share this video with people that you think would find it interesting. Your support for these last few weeks has been amazing. I'm blown away. I really appreciate you, and I hope to catch you next time. Good night.